It was very cool to interview Fred Seaman. He was John Lennon's assistant, personal assistant, in the last year of John's life. Fred got a view of John like nobody could ever have.
One of the first conversations we had was about politics. I knew to steer clear of talking about the Beatles, but I figured that was a subject that would be worth getting into, and we had an amazing conversation. I think it was my second or third day there, of politics. And John told me that if he were an American, he would vote for Reagan because he was really sour on Jimmy Carter. Thought he was a phony. He'd met Reagan back, I think, in the 70s at some sporting event or something, and he really enjoyed meeting Reagan on a personal level. They got along well. They were both like trading one-liners. But of course, Reagan was the guy who had ordered the National Guard, I believe, to go after the demonstrators in Berkeley. So I think that kind of, John maybe forgot about that, or it didn't matter anymore. But he did basically express support for Reagan, which shocked me, because I was a fan of John's for his political activism, because I was living in Germany in the late 60s. I was involved in the student movement. I was demonstrating against the war, and John was one of our heroes, because he was one of the few who would actually take a very courageous and principled stand against the war, would speak his mind in public, and he took tremendous risks in doing so. So I always looked up to him. I also saw John embark in some really brutal arguments with my uncle, who's an old-time communist, Norman Seaman. And he enjoyed really provoking my uncle, to where my uncle would get like red in the face and would be like getting really worked up when John espoused these conservative positions. And I think part of it was John just enjoyed like taking the piss out of people. And it occurred to me that maybe he was being provocative because he enjoyed provoking a reaction. But regardless, it was pretty obvious to me that he had moved away from his earlier radicalism, which is quite normal for a lot of people his age. As people settle down and sort of become middle-aged, they become more conservative.
That would surprise a lot of people, I still think, today.
Well, he was a very different person back in 1979 and 80 than he'd been when he wrote Imagine. But by 1979, he looked back on that guy and was embarrassed at the guy's naivete.
John Lennon? Ronald Reagan? I had to find someone who was there when they met.
We were doing a Monday Night Football game in Los Angeles, and I had invited Ronald Reagan to come to the Monday night game, as we did in those days. We invited a lot of people to come and be guests, and we had some great people. I had run into John Lennon that afternoon at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. It suggested that if he wanted to come to the game, he certainly could come to the game, and arrange for him to pick up a couple passes. Well, I'd forgotten all about it. I knew that the governor was going to be there, but we were getting ready to go into halftime, and Howard was going to interview the governor, as he always did. He interviewed the celebrities, and I happened to look over my shoulder during timeout, and there was Governor Reagan standing in the upper chair. We had his arm around John Lennon. He was explaining American football to John Lennon, and they were having a great time. And I punched Cosell, and he turned around and he said, Gifford, don't worry. I'll take the Beatles, you take the governor. In my mind's eye, I can still see them. It was one of the classic moments on Monday Night Football. We had a lot of them.